Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the final amendment to this bill. It will obviously not result in any delay. Once this amendment is acted upon, we will immediately consider the bill. Mr. Speaker, the people of the 1st Congressional District in Rhode Island, much like the men and women...
Gentleman is correct. Gentleman may proceed.
Much like the men and women from districts and states across this country sent me to Congress to focus on our most important priority as a nation. That priority is getting people back to work and putting our economy back on track. And yet here we are again, spending the time and energy of this Congress not focusing on creating jobs or reviving our economy, but instead we're spending the time and energy of this body with another piece of legislation that threatens our environment and fails to protect the health of our communities. If we're going to be forced by the Republican leadership to spend time in Congress considering legislation with the potential to devastate our environment and damage public health, then at the very least, we should allow some semblance of common sense to prevail. At the very least, those of us in this Congress with a sense of responsibility for protecting the health and safety of our communities must impress upon others the inherent dangers in the legislation.
Gentleman may proceed.
The inherent dangers in the legislation before us today, a bill that fails to set sufficient baseline standards for coal ash storage and disposal, which is why I'm offering a simple, straightforward amendment that could avert future tragedies, both human and environmental. While the underlying premise of this bill threatens the public safety and health of communities, and while the provisions in this legislation set insufficient standards to ensure the adequate protection of our environment and public health, I, like many of my colleagues, am a pragmatist. I fully understand that despite my opposition to this bill, H.R. 2273 is going to pass the House today. But as a former mayor, I take the public safety of my community and monitoring and preparing for and managing disasters very seriously. The key to this work, the element that saves lives and property, is early warning. Local communities cannot absorb all of this responsibility themselves. Operators and owners must do their part. And while I oppose this bill, it's indefensible to let this legislation proceed without including common sense emergency preparedness provisions, which is exactly what this amendment will do. The 2008 coal ash impoundment failure in Kingston, Tennessee, spilled more than 5 million cubic yards of coal ash, and you can see it depicted in these photographs. Over 1 billion pounds of coal ash sludge swamped houses, filled rivers, and covered 300 acres of land. 300 acres of land covered in coal ash, a substance found to contain significant quantities of arsenic and other toxins. Nearly 40 years ago, a coal waste impoundment on Buffalo Creek in West Virginia burst, unleashing a wave of sludge more than 15 feet high, traveling at a rate of about 7 feet per second. The wave struck the community living below the impoundment without warning. Within just a few hours, 125 people were dead, including 30 infants and young children, more than 1,000 injured, and 4,000 people were left homeless. Mining officials had been monitoring the rising water levels in the impoundment for 4 days before it burst, and yet never informed the men, women, and children in harm's way. This amendment will help ensure these human tragedies and catastrophic environmental disasters never happen again. This amendment requires owners and operators of surface impoundments to equip their facilities with systems to monitor for potentially hazardous conditions that could lead to a failure of the impoundment. Further, should a potentially hazardous condition develop at surface impoundments, this straightforward, common-sense amendment will require owners and operators to take action to eliminate the hazardous condition, to notify first responders, and take appropriate steps to notify and or evacuate residents, personnel, and others who may be in harm's way. In the United States right now, there are 49 toxic waste ponds at risk of catastrophic failure, just like the one that devastated Kingston, Tennessee. Each year, the United States generates 130 million tons of coal ash. We need to be prepared. As the former mayor of Providence, which was the first municipality in the nation to receive accreditation from the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, I understand the importance of preparedness and the responsibility that comes with it. Monitoring and early warning of potentially hazardous conditions saves lives. We need to make certain that if this legislation passes, it includes these common sense safeguards that will avert another tragedy and devastation. It's the responsibility of this body to protect the health and safety of the communities we serve and those affected by the legislation we pass. I urge my colleagues to support this common sense amendment and do all that we can to avoid this kind of disaster again.
Gentleman's time is expired.